Welcome, welcome. Lovely to see all your faces. So many of you I haven't seen in so long. Some of you I've just seen the other day. Welcome, welcome. Delighted to see all of you here. Welcome to my book launch. We are going to play some charge up music to get ourselves charged up and to let everybody filter into the room and to let me stream this onto Facebook. So let's just play some fun, loud music for a second. Enjoy it while we get all settled in. We are going to kick off this book launch, and I am super excited for our encore party. So here goes. Alrighty, so Facebook doesn't want to let us live stream. No problem. At least we are recording today. So for all those of you who could not get into our last session, welcome to this session. I am so delighted to have you here for the launch, the encore launch of the Tenacious Pursuit of Peace, Where to Go When Success Is Not Enough. This is absolutely being recorded, and your volume on, if you could mute yourself so we get a nice cleaner recording. Awesome. So to give this book a beautiful launch, because it deserves it, and it's been the blood, sweat, and tears of many a decade. And also, I want to share with you the concepts, a couple of stories from here, because it's that really gave me massive insights. So I want to share with you some of the stories. I'm going to be reading them to you today. And I also want to encourage you to help me make this book a bestseller. And there's one very, very simple way to do that. And it's here in the chat. I'm going to pop it into the chat. This is the actual link to use. Amazon is very, very, very funny, right? So they want us to use this and only this link that I am putting here. This is the link to our Tenacious Pursuit of Peace. I'm actually going to screen share with you just for a quick moment, because it does make a difference if you see it on your side. If it's going to let me. Hold on one second here. Technology and here we go. So on Amazon, this is what you see. I already purchased my own copy. Paperback, which should be $17.95. You should see that. And if it's not showing up as that for you, down here, this little button says New Other. You can flip it. You want to make sure you're at the paperback for $17.95. There's Amazon is tricky. And the last time they bought books and resold them for us, which is lovely of them to believe in our book so much, but it also does not count towards our bestseller status. So we're trying to get this book. We are competing with 178,000 other books, but we only have to be the one who sells the most just in this tiny window. So just in a 1 hour, 2 hour window, we can claim that spot. And even in our own category, which is women in business, we can actually claim the top spot, and we're only competing with a couple of hundred books in that case. So let's go ahead and do that together. One last rule about Amazon is that they do not count how many books you buy. Each individual book is only counted as an order. So if you want 5 books, go ahead and use those Prime benefits you pay so much for, and I pay so much for, and order it 5 separate times, right? You can just send it to yourself 5 separate times, and that'll be totally fine. Because if we don't do that, then Amazon only counts it as 1. Even if you buy 500 copies in one purchase, it only counts it as 1, which is crazy, but we got to play with the algorithm, right? We got to deal with the hand that we have. So, all right, my friends, here we are. The Tenacious Pursuit of Peace, Where to Go, When Success is Not Enough. Can everybody hear me okay? I know some people are saying it's hard to hear. Is it hard to hear? It's kind of going in and out on everybody's. Can everyone hear me okay? Or is it hard to hear on multiple fronts? Let me just take a before I start reading.
It's hard to hear on multiple fronts.
Really hard to hear. Okay, give me 30 seconds. I'm going to pop off camera. I want to make sure you hear it because that's the whole point. So hold on one moment. I'm going to be right back. Okay. When all else fails, old school headphones are going to prevail here. So we're going to just pop in the old school headphones and we are going to get them. I think I got the airplane. Okay. How about now? Is that better?
Perfect.
Oh, amazing. Look at that. Thank you, Delta Airlines, for the headphones. I appreciate that. I don't even think I have any with the old school plug apart from these ones from the airline. So for those of you who could not hear me going in and out, and those of you who have joined, welcome to the launch, the encore launch of the Tenacious Pursuit of Peace, Where to Go When Success is Not Enough. Today, we are working to make this book a bestseller and to give it the beautiful send-off into the world that it deserves. So without much further ado, let me go ahead and read. I'm a little winded. I had to run up a flight of stairs really fast and back. So let me grab a drink of water and I'm going to read you the very first story that I want to share from this book. So today, I'm going to share 3 stories from the book, and I'm also going to share one story that didn't make it into the book. It's kind of fun for me to share the pieces of the book that didn't quite make it, because they also hold something really beautiful. They just didn't have a space in this particular book. So I want to share one of those with you tonight. And the one that I'm going to start with is chapter 5, called The Nudge. And this is one of my favorite stories. For many, many reasons. It was one of the first ones that I wrote in this beautiful story format. And it really gives insight. It helps you see how I deliver the insights, because I don't want to preach to you. I don't want to necessarily teach to you. I just want to tell you beautiful stories. And I want you to come along on this journey with me while I share this story with you. Each one of the chapters begins with a title, of course, and it also begins with a quote. And one of the hardest parts of writing the book was picking which quotes were going to make it into the final cut, because there's so many that I love. And this one is from one of my favorite poems called The Pulley by George Herbert. And it says, "Let him be rich and weary, that at least, if goodness lead him not, yet weariness may toss him to my breast." So tuck in for a moment. I'm going to read this story to you from chapter 5, the opening story of chapter 5, called The Nudge. The socks, there they were again, staring at me from the middle of the living room floor like 2 living creatures, taunting me. That was it. I had had enough. I just couldn't take it for one more second. Something had to change. Years ago, my son and I had a live-in nanny staying with us in our home. Let's call her Evelyn. She was a lovely person and helped our family tremendously during a time when I was, like many other moments in my life, in transition. She was the daughter of a dear friend of our family. I'd actually been her babysitter when I was younger, and she was a tiny girl, so there was something satisfyingly synchronistic about her now living with my little family, taking care of my son. I knew her well. She was a good girl, reliable, trustworthy, patient, kind, devout, prayerful, all the things you would want in someone responsible for caring for your child, responsible for helping you raise him. She was a good example, not only to my son, but to me too. She was just the right person to help my sweet little boy navigate emerging moments in his young life. Though they were both undiagnosed at the time, we later discovered that she, like my son, had autism spectrum disorder. And so as an adult, she brought techniques and coping mechanisms to the table for him and for me that I would never have imagined to use. She was a great gift to us. and she did more for me than she will ever know. But Evelyn was messy. Not the tie your hair back into a cute little messy bun sort of messy. The make a mess and don't even notice it sort of messy. The leave your socks in the living room and your unfinished crafts on the dining room table sort of messy. In some ways, she was organized and thorough, in other ways, not. It drove me crazy. My home is my sanctuary. It's my place of refuge from the big decisions I need to make, from the external turmoil around me. It's where I refuel and recharge so I can go back out there and run at full tilt. In my home, I crave peace. And one thing that has been consistent for me throughout my life is that in order for our environment to be restful and peaceful, it needs to be neat, clean, and uncluttered. In my early years, prior to having a child, I kept my home hotel clean at all times. And to this day, that's my ideal level of organization and cleanliness. True, it's a high bar, but for me, it's a fundamental need. Visual clutter and messiness don't allow me to attain the level of unplug and rest that my high-test life requires me to have during my downtime. Evelyn knew this before she moved in with us. When I mentioned that I was looking for a nanny and she offered to relocate across the country for the position, we had a very open, honest conversation about cleanliness and the standard I would expect if she lived with me. While Noah and I lived in Michigan prior to our relocation to Phoenix, Evelyn had babysat for us now and then. She always made great food and took excellent care of my son, but she would leave a mess behind her. It was fine for an occasional babysitter, but it would not be fine while she was living with us. So we came to an agreement. Evelyn took a 6-month position as our live-in nanny. I needed her because I was traveling to client sites weekly and wanted someone with her incredible traits and good character to stay overnight with my little man. Because I was gone for a few days at a time each week, the relative tidiness of the house wasn't too much of a big deal. But when the assignment ended and I was back at home full time, it started to wear on me. I didn't mind cleaning up after my son, but cleaning up after someone I was paying to make my life easier didn't sit well with me. We talked about it quite a few times. Daily, it felt like to me. Some days it would be the socks or a craft. Other days it would be a book or papers. And yet other days it'd be unfinished chores like doing all the dishes except a spoon, a plate, and a cookie sheet, all of which sat on the counter in the sink when the rest of the dishes were being done. It drove me nuts. Yes, it was a small thing, but I struggled with it. That fateful day when I came home from an event in the early evening and was greeted by those darn socks in the middle of the living room was a day on which I needed to, in which I knew I needed to make an important decision. Evelyn's 6-month contract was nearly complete, and I needed to go forward for another 6 or call it quits. It felt like it was time to end the arrangement, but what she did for us was so important and so helpful that I felt torn. I was caught between hating the ongoing frustration of the messiness and loving all the rest. And there was so very much to love. I was stuck. So I decided to get a totally unbiased outside opinion. I asked a few of the people I loved and trusted for recommendations of a great local therapist. The same name kept popping up with everyone I asked. I'd heard it before. My sister had seen her. I knew her to be a no-nonsense straight talker, someone who would dish out the truth to you, even if it wasn't easy to hear or popular to say. Just what I needed, I thought to myself. She will know what I should do. So I went to her website to grab an appointment. Her session slots were only 30 minutes, and you could only sign up for one at a time. No recurring options were available. It annoyed me that I couldn't get more time with her, but I figured that we would do as much as we could in that short session, and I pushed confirm. I was excited about going to therapy again. I'd gone many times throughout my life to unlock trauma's hold on me, to up-level my game, and even to tune things up internally when I wasn't feeling like myself. This time it felt like a mix between an up-level and a tune-up. That question I had been obsessing over about Evelyn really needed to be resolved, and I knew I needed support to come to a resolution that would honor her contribution and support both of our needs. When the day arrived, I was running late. I only had 30 minutes with my therapist, and I felt the pressing sense of lost time bearing down on me as I rushed around the courtyard looking for the door to her suite. With each passing second, I was getting more and more perturbed. And in those few frantic moments, I realized that I was holding it together on the outside, But on the inside, the feeling of anxiety and stress that was mounting was so common that it almost felt normal to me. In that hurried search, I started to become vaguely aware that things were more off for me than I had realized before. I'm typically quick with a smile and a silver lining interpretation of even the most difficult circumstances. But these days, I struggle to find my happy. And a pair of socks on the living room floor, a few errant dishes in the sink, and this tardy start to an important meeting were putting me into a tailspin. I was slipping into depression, and I didn't like it. I had to fix the socks issue. That would resolve things. I knew it. I could never have guessed that that appointment would change my life forever. When I arrived and settled into her small and somewhat cramped office, we didn't waste much time on paperwork or perfunctory questions. I gave her a tiny bit of background. Solo mom, son's dad isn't a participant and lives in New York City. Business owner, work requires some travel. Live-in nanny who's great, but has some issues that consistently irritate me. The synopsis I gave didn't have much more meat on the bone than that rundown did, and we jumped right in. We talked about my home and how I live. We discussed my need for rest and how cleanliness and organizations are conditions needed for me to find repose. We talked about the physical spaces within the house and how none of the spaces, aside from my own bedroom, were just for me. In discussing it, I realized that I needed space, a genuine space of my own, outside of my room, where it was just for me and always mine. I needed a boundary within my living space so I could have a consistent refuge. I had vaguely recognized these things about myself before this conversation, but I saw them now in full relief, and it was so liberating. Giving voice to something important about yourself and to another person provides freedom that's hard to achieve in any other way. The session was going great. 5 minutes in, and I was already having genuine insights. And then we started to talk more about the issues with Evelyn. I went on a little diatribe about the messiness and the constant conversations about it. I talked about how I had converted one of our linen closets into an Evelyn overflow space where I'd put all the things that were left in common areas. I gave her a few dishes and socks examples, and I concluded my tirade with a strong assertion, it's just not working. It is working, my therapist stated plainly. No, it is not. I just told you that I have to argue with her about this all the time. It's not working. It is working, she insisted again. I started to get annoyed and said, but I'm having to correct her all the time about this. I'm frustrated, and the feeling in the house is so tense. How is that working? It's working for her. But I'm literally reprimanding her daily, and it's working for her. I was dumbfounded. How could our session have gotten off track so fast? It seemed like we were having a total failure to communicate. I was listing all the ways in which the situation was not working. I was telling her how annoying and frustrating and unnecessarily repetitive all this was, and she was boldly telling me that the situation was working. I was about to object again and explain again why it wasn't working when she jumped in. Look, she said, when someone does something more than twice, it is working for them. Wow, that was intense. She looked me in the eyes and repeated herself. When someone does something more than twice, it is working for them. She could see that I wasn't ready to be so easily swayed, so she told me a shocking story about a little boy whose parents had brought him to her because his behavior was out of control. She told me that the mom, dad, and little boy all came to the session. The parents told her that every day when his dad would come home from work, the little boy would go berserk. He would be disruptive and would engage in every forbidden behavior. He would hit his siblings, throw things, get loud, act unruly, damage the home, destroy toys. They had tried everything and nothing was working. It was a super stressful cycle and destructive. The parents were doing all the talking. They didn't know how to break the cycle. They were explaining a particularly bad day that had just happened, and my therapist interrupted them. She said she wanted to ask the boy to describe what was happening, and his story was quite different. His story was that he would wait with a lot of joyful expectation for his dad to come home. He loved his dad, and he was always excited to see him. His dad would arrive at home and would speak to his mom. He didn't like that. He wanted to speak to his dad. So he'd get loud and do stuff until his dad stopped talking to his mom and talked to him. And then his dad would go back to speaking to his mom again, but he still wanted to talk to him, so he'd just do more stuff. He was doing it on purpose. He said that the night they were talking about, nothing was working. So he kept going and going until finally he said with delight on his face, "I got me my whooping." My eyes nearly jumped out of my head. She calmly explained that he was craving more than just conversation and attention. What he was really craving was correction, and he was getting it in the only way he knew how. This ugly cycle was filling his emotional needs. Was it good for him? No. Was it excellent parenting? Again, no. But it was working for the boy. It was meeting his emotional needs. So he continued. Evelyn, she told me, is no different. She explained that the cycle that I was in with Evelyn was working for her. She was getting her emotional needs met. She was alone, far from family, with only a few friends and a lot of responsibilities in my home. Maybe she was craving attention or connection. Maybe she wanted to test a boundary or develop more of a friendship. Maybe it was something else entirely. Guessing the why was pure speculation without Evelyn in the room. But the point was clear, crystal clear. No matter the reason, this was working. It was working for Evelyn. This cycle we were in was filling her emotional needs. My therapist told me one last time, if a person does something more than twice, it's working for them. I leaned back in my seat and said, half to myself, it is working for her. What an insight. I had never considered that the reason it was hard to break this cycle was that I was trying to fix something that wasn't broken. It was working effectively on the other side of the relationship. There was, of course, not a conscious unwillingness on her side to change this pattern, but a subconscious emotional need was being so well met that we just couldn't work our way around it. We spent a little time talking about the now what of it all. Our arrangement has served Evelyn and me well, but now I needed my physical and emotional space in a way that I hadn't before my schedule had changed. We concluded that it was time to call it complete. We brainstormed an approach to the conversation that would preserve our relationship while making it clear that I would not be renewing the live-in nanny contract with her or with anyone else for that matter. I was at peace with the outcome. All right. That, my friends, was story number 1 for the evening. That was from chapter 5, The Nudge, the opening story of that chapter. If you have any thoughts, feel free to pop them into the comments. I will be browsing the thoughts a little bit. And I just want to remind you or tell everybody who may have joined during that first reading that we are reading some stories from The Tenacious Pursuit of Peace, Where to Go When Success is Not Enough. Because it's disruptive to pursue peace. It's neither easy nor simple, and it is a radical thing to decide to chase peace instead of chasing happiness or chasing anything external. And this I share with you through some stories from my life, and I would love for you to buy the book. Amazon has the link. We have popped it here multiple times. Let me pop it in once again. Our goal is to sell 100 books today. So if you or anyone you know or love needs or wants one, buy them individually. Amazon counts each order only as one, no matter how many books you buy. And also, if you're tempted to buy the ebook, hold off till tomorrow. Buy the hard copy. It's paperback hard copy. That is what we are going to. Amazon is counting towards our bestseller status. We're trying to hit that bestseller status in our primary category, which is women and in business. Okay, so I wanted to share with you another story from the book. And this story is from a different phase of my life. That story I just shared was from some of my early days in Phoenix. That was actually from 2019. And I want to share another story with you. I just lost my bookmark. So just hang on with me here for 1 second. Okay, so I want to share another story with you. And this is from my years in Dallas, which is in my 20s. And this is such a fun story because it shares something that was, to me, pretty hard for me to go throughout my life. It shares a little insight into something that was really difficult for me because it's something that I felt really foreign about. And it was so interesting to me to write this and to share it because many people have found this story highly relatable. And it's one of the stories that I actually found most unrelatable when I was writing the book because it felt like I'm so different than everybody else. And it's really beautiful to be able to share it with people and to have them see themselves in this story. So this is from chapter number 2, Know Who You Are. And I'll get into this in just one moment. I'm going to skip those little beautiful quotes, give you something to wait for when you buy your book. So thank you so much. I see a bunch of people popping in, getting their books. Thank you so much. Feel free to share this link to this room on any of your platforms, on your social platforms. People can come on in. The more, the merrier. I had intended to stream on Facebook. Technology is not playing nice, so we're just here. But feel free to share the link to the book or to this event on Facebook. Would love to have more of your friends here. Okay, so this story is one of my stories from some of my years in Dallas. And this is called, from chapter number 2, Know Who You Are. I'm gonna take a little sip of water and get going. Thank you so much for buying the books. I love it. Thank you, thank you. All righty. It was weirdly awkward. I was making the looping ascent up each of the spiraling levels, getting closer and closer to my designated parking spot. The walls were thick, gray concrete, and the light from outside was finding its way through the perforated spaces, but it was by no means as bright and shiny inside as it was in the sunshine outside. I had to squeeze past huge concrete pillars and make my way around narrow turns. It was a drive I had made often, but one that I never enjoyed. My muscle memory, more than my skill, was in charge of managing the process without scraping the sides of my car against the wall or other descending cars. The busy, bustling traffic from the visitors and day parkers that filled the temporary spots on the lower floors had subsided, and I was navigating through the resident parking area undisturbed. I was on the phone with a man I had recently started dating. He lived in Miami, and we were just beginning to explore the possibility of a long-distance relationship. We initially met through business many years prior, and were only a few days into exploring something beyond a casual sort of professional connection. While he didn't know me extraordinarily well, the many years of our acquaintanceship meant that he knew me more than most. The ambiance of the late afternoon had felt alive and peaceful, but I had just said something that made my own eyebrows rise and my eyes go wide. I can't remember our exact conversation, but I remember it was pleasant and light. I was telling him a story or filling him in on my day, or maybe we were discussing some upcoming travel plans. While the specifics of the conversation are vague, the moment isn't. I was talking and was wrapping up what I was saying when I suddenly used a big multisyllabic word at the end of my phrase. I don't have any idea which of my crazy vocabulary words it may have been, but I know it was an uncommon word and a big long one at that. The second the word left my mouth, I paused. He paused too. The tension was palpable. I continued to drive up to my parking space, which was now very close. The conversation seemed to be suspended in midair even as I continued to drive. I felt very uncomfortable, and as I pulled into my space and put my car in park, I started to hyper-focus on the fabric of the passenger seat in my now parked car. It was dark charcoal black, woven with a tight weave, interspersed with a few gray fibers. I was preoccupying my mind, trying to distract myself from my own discomfort. The only thing I could think to say was, "Sorry about that," and I blurted it out before I had a chance to stop. "Sorry? Why are you sorry?" "Oh, I never use words like that," I replied, trying to sound easy breezy and casual, knowing full well that I was anything but at that moment. It was clear that he was a bit confused by my awkward pause, my apology, and then my little blow-off statement. I could feel it, but I didn't really know how to make it better. "Words like what?" he pressed. "You know, big, long, complicated words. I just don't really use words like them." My voice sounded both apologetic and guilty as I said that. I was acting like I had done something truly offensive. I was behaving as though I had transgressed some big, important boundary with my vocabulary choice, because in fact, I had. I had just broken one of my own internal rules of behavior. It was a rule that he didn't know anything about, and that I hadn't articulated to myself or to anyone else for that matter, but it was a big one to me. I felt the overwhelming urge to resolve the uneasiness by sharing the full truth with him. So I launched into the story. My choice not to use complicated or long words started 9 years earlier in my first year of college. During my freshman year, I was coming straight out of a 6 year stint in an exclusive, academically rigorous, all girls boarding school. The school was a K 12 with only a handful of boarding students in the upper grades, of which my sister and I were part. At our boarding school, smart was cool, and nobody thought anything about it. We all loved learning and basked in the joy of language. We would get lost in the dictionary when we had to look up words. Latin and French weren't elective courses for us, but mandatory parts of our curriculum starting as early as 5th grade. In the 11th and 12th grades, our only elective, which very few of the girls elected not to take, was Greek. So over the course of the years, we had all acquired extensive vocabularies enriched by the study of classical and foreign languages. It was delightful and something that all of us at boarding school had taken for granted. We all used big words and liked it. When I got to college, I quickly realized that I and my fellow students from my high school hadn't actually been the norm. We were pretty nerdy. In fact, my first 2 years at college were far easier than my last 2 years of high school. And while I may have been academically and linguistically ahead of my college peers, I was socially behind. Since my school had been an all girls school, I hadn't been in a classroom with boys since the 6th grade. Not even once. Never. I had had a few male teachers in those 6 years, but no male peers. We didn't have joint dances or social events. We were strictly forbidden to fraternize and risked expulsion if we got caught socializing with boys outside of a family environment without a chaperone. And to make matters worse, I wasn't just a day student who had to abide by the rules of the school during the day and then went home to a naturally co-ed environment in the evening. I was a boarding student. I lived at the school with girls and nuns for 9 out of 12 months a year for a full 6 years. It doesn't take a vivid imagination to get a picture of just how awkward and full of teenage angst I was in a co-ed classroom those first few months of college classes. I was often distracted, wondering if I should take notes, if I should or shouldn't look at the boy sitting next to me, take notes in front of him, smile, chat, heck, even breathe. So it was a good thing I was ahead of the game academically and had solid study habits to help me bridge the gap. Despite my struggle to adjust to a new social environment, I was then, as I am now, friendly, outgoing, and an extroverted person. And I wanted a wide group of friends. I did make some really good friends, and yes, eventually even befriended a few of the guys too. But while I made good friends, I wasn't part of the in crowd, the popular mix of people. It nettled me not to be among the popular students, because in high school I had been popular, well liked, well respected. Remember that for us, smarts had equaled status, and I graduated valedictorian. For all those reasons and more, college was a bit bumpy the first few months. And then midterms happened. Midterm prep was something I had never experienced before. My high school didn't do tests like that. We were expected to be ready for a test at any time in any subject. So we stayed up on all of our studies consistently and didn't have a famine and feast study method. When midterms rolled around, I was a little nervous because of the newness of it all and because of the general anxiety floating around campus, but I wasn't terribly stressed about the content. I had attended every lecture, had taken extensive notes, and had read every single page of assigned reading. I knew the subject matter in all of my courses, inside and out. I felt ready and I was open about it. My peers were not prepared at all. So in a matter of a few days, I went from being a sideliner to being invited to every study group and every gathering of all the coolest kids in all of my classes. People were preparing for tests 100% of the time, and I was a big part of their preparations. I was so sought after. It was flattering, and it stroked my ego, which had been bruised over those first few rough months. It felt great to be invited to those late night study groups off campus, to be called to join into an impromptu gathering in the student lounge, to compare class notes, to be asked to help prep answers to the study guide. I loved it. I was all about it. I had finally made it. I was in. I was part of the popular crowd. Despite my awkwardness around the boys earlier in the year, I had still been incredibly diligent. My boarding school foundation served me well, and I helped everyone prepare to rock and ace their exams. I gave out copies of all my notes, and I helped people study and prepare, and they got good grades. We all did. I was so happy for all my newfound popular friends, and although super awkward and uncomfortable with going, I was delighted to be asked to a post-midterms off-campus party to celebrate our successes. There were kids from other schools and drinking and loud music, and the house we went to was packed with college kids. I felt uncomfortable and out of place. I quietly slipped out early after I lost track of the friends who had invited me. I may not have loved the party or even enjoyed myself much while I was there, but I did love the invitation. I loved being included. It made me feel seen and accepted, and I couldn't wait for the next one. When classes resumed, I kept waiting and waiting. I had felt that the people who invited me to all their study groups and I were now friends. I truly expected them to treat me the way they had during exam prep, to invite me to their gatherings, to keep me in the loop on things that were going on, to include me. And they didn't. Nobody called. Nobody reached out. Not one single invitation to a casual gathering, a late night coffee, or even to join them in the cafeteria for dinner came. Not a text, not a call, nothing. It stung. I had so wanted to be known and to be liked for the person that I was, and that didn't seem to be the case. They liked me because I was smart. They liked me because I had something to offer to them, information, answers to prep guides and study questions, and most of all, meticulous notes from every lecture and every class I was in. I was a great study partner, a great tutor, but not friend material. I was still in the process of calibrating my own social compass and adjusting to a totally new social environment, and this was all really hard for me to accept. I felt so hurt and so used. Being wanted because I was intelligent was particularly painful to me at that stage of my life because I truly wanted to be liked for all of who I was, not just for my smarts. It took me quite a few weeks to get over my hurt feelings, and when the pain subsided, I made a decision. Never again would I put myself in a position to be liked because I was smart. In fact, I didn't even want to appear to be smart. I wanted to be average. I wanted to be like everyone else. And I wanted to be liked, loved, pursued for who I was as a person, not for how smart I was or for how incredible my notes were. At the time, I didn't see being smart as part of who I was at the core. And I didn't want anyone to know that I was smart anymore. It was then that I decided to adjust my vocabulary. I made a decision to give up big, long, multisyllabic words. I was going to keep my language a little less brainy and a lot more normal. I also made the decision never again to share my grades with anyone in my class. They were promises I made to myself, rules I set in stone internally. I'd never breathed a word about them to anyone at all, not really even to myself, but I was telling the story now. And I told him that I had stuck to both promises religiously, with only one exception. When I was hanging out with my sister, she was 2 years ahead of me at the same college, and her friends late at night, studying or just relaxing, and we'd start to get loopy from lack of sleep, we would whip out our biggest, longest, most atypical multisyllabic words. The longer the words, the better. We would laugh and be intentionally silly about it. We'd try to one-up each other with more and more obscure words. Her friends thought it was hilarious and would tell us that when the MacRae girls started using those big words, we all know it's well past bedtime. Her friends would joke about it. Mine never got the chance because I never did it around them. But that was it. In the second half of my first semester in college, 9 years before the moment in the garage, I had made a conscious effort not to appear to be smart by strictly adhering to my rule never to use long or complicated words. When the whole angsty story had come pouring out and I had bared a big, vulnerable piece of myself, my would-be boyfriend sort of chuckled and asked me, "Are you really serious about the vocabulary thing?" I told him I was and added again, "I don't want people to know that I'm smart." His reply froze me. "Madeleine, anyone who's had more than a 5-minute conversation with you knows that you're smart." I could not believe it. That simply couldn't be true. I thought I was hiding it so well. How could everyone know? It was my turn to ask him if he was serious. By his tone, I could tell that he was as surprised by all of this as I was, but we were standing on totally separate sides of the equation. I was sitting there, still in my car, in shock. It was like I was the emperor in the old folk tale of the emperor's new clothes, walking confidently down the street in what I thought were gorgeous garments, hiding all the parts of me I wanted hidden, only to find out that I was totally stark naked, walking down the street in absolutely nothing, exposed. Nothing was covered or hidden at all. He was sitting in his Miami condo, feeling like he was stating the obvious. And with one simple sentence, he had shifted my whole paradigm and had made me aware that no matter what I did, I wasn't hiding the smart part of me. It was so much of who I was, of who I am, that there wasn't anything I could do to conceal it. We had a really great debrief about the whole thing. And while he and I never did become an official item, he gave me a great gift that day. He made me realize that when something is an essential part of who you are, it cannot be hidden or disguised, at least not forever. In the beautiful words of the bard himself, William Shakespeare, the truth will out. That whole conversation was exposing, but it was liberating too. The year was 2010. All right. That was story numero dos. That story has sat with me for a long time because it feels like who's had the experience of going to boarding school, using big words, feeling awkward, deciding not to use them. That's an atypical story. But the truth about it is that we're all seeking acceptance in one way or another. And so often we seek it from outside. We want to be part of the crowd. We want to just blend in. And it's our uniqueness that makes us feel so different, that makes us feel so standouty. And so we try to squish away the uniqueness and we try to just become one of the herd, right? We just want to be part of that. But that's not what allows us to be most joyfully ourselves. That's not what allows us to be compelling. And the funny truth of the matter is that my friend so joyfully shared with me and knocked my socks right off is that sometimes you can't even hide it if you try, right? It's just so much who you are. So that was our story number 2. I wanted to share that one with you. And while we're in our little break between stories, the next story I'm going to share is actually a story that did not make the cut from the book. This is the story that got left on the threshing floor, and this you'll only hear here, right? I'm not sharing it publicly. This is a story that there's a couple little in a folder that's called Next Book that didn't get used for this book, but I wanted to share this one because it's a little bit of a counterbalance. The story that I just shared is about embracing who you are and feeling really joyful in that embrace. And this next story is a little bit of a counterbalance to this story. This was originally going to be part of chapter 4. And in chapter 4, I share a story about something that one of my early mentors in my career, his name is Mike Lee. He was my CEO at Somfy. You'll hear him in a couple of my stories in the book. It was something that he had taught me, a lesson about the Polaroid, which when you get the book and you read it, chapter 4, you'll hear that lesson. It's a great one. It's a great one. But I'm not going to share that one today. I'm going to share the story that came after that from Mike Lee. So it's a story from him. And it actually got cut from the book. So it's not going to be in the book. I'm going to be looking at my screen and reading it over here. And this is just a little bit of a counterbalance to the last story, just to give you a different perspective, because there's a wide range of things to see. So for those of you who are joining us new, for those of you who weren't here for my preamble, if you haven't gotten your books or you'd like to get another one, you spontaneously thought of someone who would love it, pop into that link and grab your book from Amazon because we are going for bestseller status. Okay, here we are, little drink of water, and I'll dive right in. Okay, this is from the threshing floor, the leftover bits that I loved so much, but they just wouldn't jam into the right spot of the book. So here it goes. From leftovers from chapter 4. We all need to consider if the Polaroid we are looking at of ourselves is current. And when you read chapter 4, you'll know exactly what I mean there. Too often we are stuck thinking about ourselves, looking at a picture of ourselves that's outdated or inaccurate. Sometimes it's our circumstances that have changed. Sometimes it's our awareness of ourselves that has changed. Sometimes it's us, for the better or not. And it's well worth considering if it's time for a fresh new picture of who we are. not just our external view. It was Michael who called me out on my own Polaroid several years later. He called me into his office one afternoon, late in the week, over a year before I left the company. He started by saying all the good things I was doing and how proud he was of my success. He had been a huge champion and a mentor for me throughout my career, and the acknowledgement was really nice to hear. And then he said it. He didn't beat around the bush, he just stated it plainly. Madeleine, the problem is you are so bright and so intense and move so fast that you burn people. I had made the conscious decision years prior to be the type of leader that leaned into kindness, that caught more bees with honey than with vinegar. I was careful to give credit where credit was due, to highlight the work of others that I relied on to create our momentum. I gave constant care and effort to getting people aligned with me instead of opposed to me. So those words, you burn people, burned themselves right into my heart. He explained that the organization was a big ship and that it takes a big ship a long time to make moves. He encouraged me to be a little more patient, to make fewer changes, and to give things longer between changes. It wasn't that what I was doing was bad or wrong. It was all good, all necessary, all welcome, but it was too much for the other leaders. I thought that I had been giving them plenty of runway, but it seems that my Polaroid was a bit inaccurate after all. He went on to explain that there were more things in life than just work. I was single and unattached. I didn't have obligations outside of the office, and I could work 24/7 if I wanted. But he didn't want his executives working 24/7. He wanted us to work hard when we had to, but to go easy on ourselves when we could. We were doing enough, and he wanted enough to be okay. I understood where he was coming from, and I accepted the correction as graciously as I could, although it was tough to hear. I understood that he wanted to build a team that could sustain over the very long haul, and that my intense bursts didn't match with the culture he was creating. It was hard for me to accept, but I did tamp down my flame considerably, and I started to think about whether the picture of who I was and what I wanted fit in well in the frame something had to offer. When what you have to offer is hurting more than helping, it's not that you are wrong or bad, or that the other party is wrong or bad either. It is that you are in the wrong place or operating under the wrong conditions. You have to accept that the fit is off, and no matter how hard it is, you have to adapt or you have to move on. Context changes everything. As I've built my own business, I've cranked that flame up to full intensity. I've embraced how I work and how I tick. I've leaned into my strengths and am not fretted over my weaknesses. And I've lost count of how many people have found courage in my example, of how many people have told me that my stories, my support, my intensity, my flame has been inspiring and incredibly helpful for them. That same fire that used to burn my peers in corporate now uplifts the people in my circle. When you get into the right space and are under the right conditions, that same exact light that once burned and hurt can be healing, helpful, and transformative. It can inflame and inspire in all the right ways. The truth is that you get to shine. It is your privilege, not your prison. You get to shine your own unique individual light in exactly your own way. There is no one on this earth or in the heavens who is exactly like you. You are and have within you a beautiful, brilliant, unique light. It might show up as bold and brash. It might show up as soft and gentle. It might be cool and calm or grounded and deep. It might be light and joyful or fiery and fierce. No matter what it is absolutely there and absolutely yours. The light that others have is not better or worse than yours. It's different, qualitatively, quantitatively, relationally, situationally. Your light, your unique blend of gifts and talents, strengths and skills, desires and motivations. of stories and events, situations and generations, all of it is wholly your own. It has been forged through the hurdles you've had to overcome, the weaknesses you have had to navigate, the hard challenges and the soaring victories. It is the product of who you are and how you have navigated this precious life of yours. But it is there, and it is yours to discover, to develop, and to use. And if you're only willing to lean into the fullness of the truth of who you truly are. There you go. That's my one that didn't make the cut. I know it's a fan favorite. It's a fan favorite. That's a good one. When you read some of the ends of the chapters, you'll get a little more of this inspirational, hope-filled journey of embracing the lessons. And there's a couple of cool little things I want to share with you about the book. Each chapter ends with a little, we call them practice, a little practice that helps you take some of the concepts from the story, some of those insight moments, and do something with them, do something practical, useful for yourself. When I first started writing the book, my book coach, Kim, who's here on this call, Kim, love you. Thank you for all your help and support, asked me, Madeleine, is this going to be a being book or a doing book? And I said, hey, Kim, that this is a being book with a little side helping of doing, right? So the doing is very important, very helpful, but the being is what I want you all to embrace, because in the being, that is where you can find the peace. That is where you can find the peace. So I promised this would be an hour, but I do have one more story to share. It is the story from the final chapter of the book, chapter 10, called True North. And for those of you who might need to hop off, feel free to do so. You're welcome to go if you only had an hour. I did see you, Kim, you waved. She said I waved, doesn't have internet. That's okay. And I want to just invite you, if you need to go, feel free. It's being recorded. This recording will be sent to your inbox. I also wanted to let you know that as a thank you for supporting my launch, I'm going to be sharing with each one of you in your inbox a coupon code. I'm actually having a retreat in March 1st through the 3rd in beautiful Phoenix. So for those of you who are in cold weather and want to escape it for a little while, you are welcome to come down and join me in beautiful Phoenix on March 1st through the 3rd. And there's a little coupon code that you can get to upgrade yourself to get an extra spa treatment and a private book reading and breakfast with me. So if you want to use that, feel free to check out your email. And if you don't see it, just reach out, right? Any email that you get from us, you can respond to it. We will be there. There's a human on the other side. So I want to share this last story with you. One of my early reviewers, which I so love, and those of you who might have copies of the book already, if you want to share your impressions of the book on Amazon, we love that. If there's anything that you'd like to share, of course, feel free to do it in the notes, comments. I will read them all when I'm done. I see there are many. I so enjoy reading them. So if you have anything to share, feel free to pop it in there. One of my early readers said that the book reads like a novel without a plot, which I really, that warmed my heart. That made me feel very proud as an author to hear that it reads as a novel without a plot. But there is a little bit of plot line in this story. And one of the plots is what happened with some of the stories with my son's dad and the turmoil and the ending of our relationship. And I wanted to end on a beautiful note for him. And this is chapter number 10. This is going to be the final story that I read. And these are all the openings of the chapters. So stay tuned for when you get your own book. You'll get some more of that uplifting bright of my last that I shared at the ending of the chapters. So this is chapter 10. I will leave the beautiful Huxley quote for you to explore when you get the book. It's one of my favorites. I've actually loved it since high school. So it made it into the book as well. So here comes with this story. And for those of you who are joining us now, grab the link. I know it's been shared a bunch of times. Head to Amazon, individually order each individual copy. And if you want 3 books, please place 3 orders. Amazon counts them that way. So tricky Amazon algorithm. And if you have anyone in your life who you know would love these stories and be uplifted by them, I encourage you to share the link today. The more people that buy in the next couple hours, the more would be helping us towards reaching our bestseller status. So appreciate that. Okay, so final story from The Tenacious Pursuit of Peace, Where to Go When Success is Not Enough, chapter 10, True North. I'm gonna take a little sip of water. I got through this one without crying the last time, so we'll see. We'll see. No promises. My son's dad passed away in late 2021. The day before he died, Paul had been chatting with his son, sitting on FaceTime with us as we read bedtime stories. It was Noah's 7th birthday, and Paul wanted to spend as much of the evening with him as possible. When it was time to turn off the lights and settle down to sleep, he had said his goodbyes and sent all the hugs and kisses and had asked me to call him back when Noah was sleeping. Now, I usually had very clear boundaries with Paul. We were co-parents, not friends. Paul's life had been tragic since we parted ways. He lost his business and his livelihood and had been reduced to the humiliating situation of living back at home with his mother in his 50s, unable to provide for himself or his children. It was hard to watch and even harder for him to endure. In the early stages of our co-parenting journey, I had kept my distance simply to protect myself. Although our relationship had taken so much from me and had left me so shattered, I still loved Paul, still found him attractive, still wanted him to find his way to solid ground, and still felt pulled to help him do that. When Paul and I first started dating, he was going through a lot, and I thought I was helping him get through the rough patch to the other side of the difficulty. I was looking at his life through the lens of mine, and in my life, even the roughest of rough patches had led to solid ground on the other side. I have always sought the solid ground. In his life, however, he would sometimes go through a tiny lull, but would end up in waters even darker and stormier and more dangerous. His life wasn't a navigation through, it was a navigation constantly further and deeper into turbulence. I could only see that after I was out of the boat, so to speak. So I had to hold strong boundaries so that my compassion would not go haywire and compel me to jump back in. I had to keep my distance so that I would not be tempted to dive into the water and save him from the constant state of drowning in which he found himself. I knew that jumping back in would lead me to being pulled under the water. I had nearly drowned once, and I wasn't willing to risk it a second time. From the day my coach told me the drowning person at the resort story from an earlier chapter, I had been very careful about my boundaries with Paul. As time progressed, my romantic feelings subsided, and I felt stronger and more capable of handling the splashing water. I would come closer and would let my guard down. Time and time again, it led to aggravation, hurt, and upset. It was too disruptive to be worth the risk. So I had remained vigilant and to keep those boundaries really strong, even when I hadn't wanted to, and even when it felt unnecessary. Despite my need for strong boundaries, I always gave Paul full and unfettered access to my son, his son. From day one, I knew that Noah would want to love both his parents, and that no long-term good and only long-term harm could come if I made him choose, if I spoke ill of his dad, if I poisoned his heart. So I didn't do any of that. I put up strong boundaries for myself, and I kept a watchful eye with our child. So all the story time and the FaceTimes, the calls and the conversations that they wanted flowed often and freely. And in those interactions, I wasn't the primary interlocutor. Noah was. My connection with Paul was friendly and cordial, and sometimes even a bit chatty, but it wasn't deep, and it certainly didn't include conversations after Noah was asleep. But that night was different. There was something different about Paul when he asked me to call him back. I couldn't articulate it, but I could feel it, so I promised him that I would. When the house was quiet and I could hear the soft sleeping breaths that Noah was taking, I slipped out of his bedroom, brewed myself a cup of steaming hot tea, settled into my favorite white glider, and called Paul back. I was perched up in our apartment on the 31st floor, looking out over the twinkling lights of the city. The sky was a deep, dark blue, not pitch black yet, and it was peaceful all around. And our conversation was peaceful too. We chatted about our son, his school year, how he was doing just a year after losing my dad, his beloved papa. Paul had been a godsend when my dad got sick. He was a walking medical resource center and broke down the test results for me and my family in plain English. His issues, our boundaries, all of it were set aside as he stepped into the role of counselor and medical interpreter, a role where he shone brightly. He told us what was good news and what was worrisome. He told us when things were probably worse than what we were being told by the hospital. And then he told me exactly what to ask in strong medical terms so that the doctors would take me seriously and tell me the unfiltered truth. And they did. He explained to us the disease process and helped us be as prepared as we could be for the end. He was incredibly supportive and had really stepped up on taking advantage of his parenting time after Dad had died too. In that 1 year, he had come to Phoenix for a week so I could get away for some much needed time on my own to do some grieving and healing in private. He had taken Noah for spring break and then again for a few weeks during the summer. It was so nice. Nothing like that had happened in many years, not since Noah had been 2 years old. So Noah and I were both so happy. And so was Paul. He adored his little boy and was delighted to have so much time with him. There could not have been a better win, win, win. As we were talking about Noah and his grief and how much better both Noah and I had been doing, I thanked Paul for all that he had done for me, for our family, just 1 year prior. I had thanked him many times before, but there was something special about the conversation that night. There was no turbulence lingering in the air like there had often been. It just wasn't there. He said that no thanks were needed. He told me that he loved me and he would always be there for me whenever I needed him. He didn't pause for an answer. He knew I would have told him that he would always have a special place in my heart as the father of my son, but that I didn't love him in a romantic way and hadn't for many years. He continued, I know I've told you this before, but maybe I didn't say it all. So I wanted to tell you how sorry I am for what I did to you. Not just at the end, but all of it. You deserved better. I hurt you, and you were never anything but good to me. It was wrong. I was wrong, and I am so sorry. I stopped rocking. I deepened my gaze into the darkening sky. He had said some of that before, but there was more to his apology this time. Some level of understanding, some ownership of harm, and some genuine accountability that I had never heard before. Paul, I answered, I forgave you a long time ago. You are forgiven, truly 100% forgiven. I had told him that in the past too, but even on my side, there was a level of sincerity that had never been there before. Of course, I had meant it fully in the past and hadn't harbored anything ill towards him. But again, there was something different in the air this time. Often his apologies would be laced with a butterfly net to see if maybe, just maybe, I was opening to rekindling something between us, or to snatch up a drip of my pity or compassion. There was no net today at all. Nothing like that. But something else seemed to be hanging in the air. I usually kept these sorts of conversations, when they had happened in the past, as superficial as possible, because I didn't want to invite emotional intimacy or to welcome a storm surge of grievances that he had with the world at large. It didn't feel like a flurry of self-pity or raging against the machine was imminent. The mood was much more pensive, and there was something full about the pauses. A deep and meaningful silence hung in the air. He was letting those words soak in as I pondered within myself whether to take the conversation deeper than I would usually have done, or just wrap it up there and say my goodnights. He broke the silence with, I'm not so sure I deserve it. I had my answer. This was the moment to go deeper than I had before. Everyone deserves forgiveness, Paul. Everyone. There is nothing so heinous that you could do, nothing that could ever have done, that you could ever have done, that would be outside the scope of forgiveness. God is the one who forgives. And what's outside the scope of God? By his very nature, God is omnipotent. And if one single human could do anything that was outside of the scope of forgiveness, God would be no more. You aren't bigger than God. Your transgressions, no matter what they may have been, no matter what, not bigger than God. Nothing that you could have done or that you could do is outside the scope of forgiveness. If I have forgiven you and God's willing to forgive you, what is holding you back from you forgiving yourself? I've deserved everything that I've gotten. I left a wake of hurt behind me for so long, he answered, with a level of compassion and of personal ownership of his role in that hurt that I hadn't ever heard him say before. And I followed up with, and don't you think you've paid for it long enough? How long are you going to have to suffer until you think you've suffered enough? What is it going to take to clear you? You've already suffered enough. You don't have to continue suffering. You're suffering now by choice. What if you didn't have to? What if you made a different choice? You certainly can. Nobody expects you to continue like this. You can make a new choice. You can do it. You can decide to just ask for forgiveness and to be forgiven, and it can be done. Are you ready? Are you really ready to be forgiven? A rich silence hung in the air between us. The evening sky had intensified from the deep blue of late evening into a rich, dark, inky black of night. The nighttime covered city sparkled outside of my window like a blanket, nurturing, strong, protective. With hesitance in his voice, he finally spoke. I think I might be. Another moment of pregnant pause. I really think I might. He concluded with more certainty in his voice than his words conveyed. And that was the first time I had ever, in the decade I had known him, heard it in his voice. Hope. Genuine hope. I sat back in my chair and began to glide again. I kept looking out the window at the twinkling lights of the city, and I urged him to talk to God, to ask for forgiveness, and to let the gift of forgiveness flow into his heart, to let him forgive himself. I told him, there's something almost magical that happens when we embrace forgiveness. When we forgive, it's not the other who is healed, it is us. And when we are both the forgiven and the forgiver, the impact is compounded exponentially. That's why it's so hard to do, because we not only have to offer the olive branch, we have to accept it at the same time too. You can do this. I did it. And if I can, you can. You're so strong and resilient and ready. Paul, you're so ready, so ready. You deserve it. Imagine the peace it will bring your soul. My words were gentle, strong, and inviting. They flowed effortlessly as I spoke about the riches of forgiveness and urged him to translate his hope into action and to turn this page on this chapter of such extreme sadness and suffering. Our conversation ended with a level of peace I have never felt for him or with him ever before. It ended with boundless hope and deep peace. He unexpectedly died in his sleep the very next night. That was my final conversation with Paul, and it closed out our sometimes tumultuous relationship with the theological virtues, the threefold blessings of faith, hope, and love. And what a gift that was. Being able to talk about how their dad died with the children he left behind, and to point towards the light of love, the wellspring of hope, and the pivot towards faith was a mercy unlike any other that I have ever experienced. Any consolation for their broken hearts was meaningful to me and to them, and this one in particular carried a profound balm. Paul always loved his kids very deeply, and when he could, he expressed that love by lavishing them with gifts. It was just his style to leave us all with such a big, important gift. Our final earthly conversation has been a spring to which I've traveled many times, and from which I've often drawn a deep draught of solace. I'll be forever grateful for that conversation. Seeing the doors of hope open like that on the threshold of eternity delivered a level of closure and of peace to me that may not have been available to me in any other way. It was a tremendous gift that came under heartbreaking circumstances, wrapped in such hard to accept wrapping paper. I'll always imagine Paul cradled in the hands of hope, surrounded with everlasting peace. Rest easy, my friend. There's more to the chapter, and to the end of the book, but I wanted to share that one with you because it's a beautiful one. And it was an unexpected gift. There's so many moments of unexpected gift, not in just my life, but in everyone's, right? And part of my strong, compelling reason to share these stories and to share the hard ones and the painful ones, and also to share the beautiful ones and the bright ones and the joyful ones, is because I'm just a regular girl from a suburb of Detroit who has gone through some really rough patches and who's gone through some really bright patches. And if I can do it, you can do it, right? This book is a book of hope. It's a book of little inspirational moments. Sometimes it might be a book of challenge, and that's okay, right? And I want it to meet you where you are today. So my invitation to you is to grab yourself a copy and to just let these stories sink in as they will. One of the reasons why I quite like that there's no plot in this book is you can choose to cherry pick whatever you want, right? You start reading a chapter, a little too intense for you, no problem, move right along, right? No big deal. You won't miss a thing. If it's not for you in that moment, there certainly is something else here. So I just wanted to say thank you for everyone who has made this launch and the process of getting this book to where it is today possible for me. There's lots of acknowledgements in the front of the book because it's not just been one or two people. It's not just been my immediate team. It's been every single person with whom I've interacted that has enriched my life. It's all the stories that made it into the pages of this book and all the stories that have been written on my heart from my interactions with every single person in this room, every single person that I meet, every single person who I get the joy of being part of their story. And it's just been a really beautiful experience to be able to package it up into some words. As you heard in my stories, I love words. So it's been my delight to package it up in words and to share it with you. And I want to offer it to you as just an opportunity to meet yourself a little bit more deeply and to take the bold and atypical path of pursuing peace. And the pursuit of peace comes when you can deeply acknowledge and love who you are and where you are and where you're going and be bold in that pursuit, right? It doesn't live out there. It's not somewhere far away, hard to find. It's just right here in the quiet place. And this book is both a being book and a doing book. And I invite you to enjoy it and to get quiet with it and to listen to what comes up for you, right? Because these stories were once my stories, but now they're for you. So thank you so much to everybody for being here today. Thank you so much for letting me share this journey with you, for helping me kick this beautiful book off into the world, into its own little life. I'm joking that I actually have two books now they're actually Irish twins. I have my two books. This one's not even a year old yet, and this one's already being born. So we got some Irish twins going on. And The Unusual Penguin is my little children's story. If you want a copy, feel free. You can grab it on Amazon, little bonus in there. But this is our brand new baby. First baby's still beautiful and second baby is still beautiful. So my little Irish twin books. And thank you so much, everybody, for making today a beautiful event. Thank you for coming. Thank you for your joyful presence. I love each and every one of you. So many of you here mean more to me than you might ever know. Some of you actually show up in the pages of my book. Michelle Gunderson, I'm looking at you. So Michelle, I'll tell you what your chapter is. Your chapter is chapter number. So some people get mentioned very early on, and I think it's chapter 8. Is it page 82? Let me see, honoring your GPS. Nope, that's not it. I know how the chapter starts. Hold on, finding Michelle's chapter because she's here. Oh, here it is. Starts on page number, 85. Your chapter number 4, narrative control. So thank you so much for your presence in my life. Thank you all so much for being here. Have a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful rest of your week and a beautiful weekend. If anybody wants to reach out to me, I will be popping on social from here on out. But thank you so much for being here today. Have a beautiful and peaceful weekend ahead. Thank you, everybody. Everybody, thank you. Bye. Thank you so much. Bye.